The first rule of suburban warfare is this: never let them see you sweat. The second, and arguably more important rule, is that a tape measure, in the right hands, is more dangerous than a loaded gun. In the hands of Carol Peters, president for life of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, it was a weapon of mass destruction aimed squarely at my sanity. Leo. Her voice cut through the placid July morning with the precision of a laser. I was perched 10 feet up on an aluminum ladder, a tiny screwdriver in my hand, performing the delicate task of mounting a new security camera to the eaves of my garage. It was a thing of beauty, a sleek, dark gray dome, barely larger than a baseball, with 4K resolution and night vision that could probably see into next Tuesday. I paused, screwdriver tip hovering over a minuscule screw. "Morning, Carol. Lovely day for passing judgment on your neighbors, isn't it?" I didn't need to look down. I could feel her presence boring into the base of my skull. Carol didn't walk. She materialized, drawn to the scent of unapproved home improvements, like a shark to blood. "The Covenant, Section 4, Paragraph 3, Subsection B," she announced, her voice crisp with the thrill of citation. "It clearly states that all external fixtures must be no more than 6 inches by 6 inches. I brought my laser measure." I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that did little to dispel the tension coiling in my gut. I glanced down. There she was, a portrait of suburban tyranny in a beige pantsuit, aiming a small black and yellow device at my new camera. A tiny red dot danced on the housing. "You're clocking it at 6.5 by 6.5, Leo. That's a full half-inch of non-compliance. It's a monstrosity." "It's a security camera, Carol, not a satellite dish for communicating with aliens, though I'm starting to see the appeal," I said, turning a screw with deliberate slowness. "The extra half-inch is the weatherproof gasket, to protect the delicate electronics from the weather, which, last I checked, we have a lot of around here. Rain, hail, the occasional biblical plague of locusts. The usual." "The rules don't mention gaskets," she sniffed, as if a gasket were some sort of decadent luxury, like a gold-plated toilet or a second car that wasn't a sensible sedan. "The measurements are absolute. It's coming down, or you'll be getting a fine. A Level 1 infraction is $50, but since this is your 4th violation this quarter," she tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her ever-present clipboard, "we're escalating to a Level 2, $200. 4th violation. I did a quick mental inventory. The first had been the welcome mat I'd put down when I moved in 6 months ago. It said, "Come back with a warrant." Carol had deemed it an affront to community hospitality. It was replaced with one that said, "Welcome," in a font so bland it could have been designed by the IRS. The second was for leaving my trash and recycling bins at the curb for a full 11 minutes past the 9 a.m. post-pickup deadline. I'd received a time-stamped photo in my email as proof. The third, and my personal favorite, was the seasonal wreath incident, where the pine cones on my Christmas wreath were apparently arranged in a structurally unsound and aesthetically chaotic pattern. I had quit my soul-crushing corporate job as a senior network architect to escape a world of beige cubicles and meaningless regulations. I'd cashed in my stock options, bought this modest 2-story house in what was advertised as a peaceful, modern community, and set up shop as a freelance cybersecurity consultant. The dream was simple: work from my own home, on my own terms, and never again have to attend a meeting about synergizing our core competencies. Instead, I had traded one beige tyrant for another. Except this one had the power to fine me for the spacing of my shrubbery. "Just send me the bill, Carol," I said, snapping the camera's cover into place. "I'll file it with the others under cost of breathing in Maple Creek Estates." Her lips thinned into a bloodless line. It was her tell, the tiny sign that my sarcasm had breached her defenses. But her gaze drifted past my garage, toward my backyard. Her eyes narrowed. Oh no, she'd spotted the real prize. "And what?" she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Is going on back there?" I climbed down the ladder, my heart sinking. My backyard was my sanctuary, my project, my magnum opus. And to Carol, it was undoubtedly the seventh circle of hell. I was building a shed. But it wasn't just any shed. This was the Nerd Cave, a 10x 12-foot fortress of solitude that I'd designed from the ground up. It had its own dedicated fiber optic line, a climate control system powerful enough to cool a small data center, and soundproofing that would muffle the roar of a jet engine. Inside, I would house my server racks, my monitoring stations, and my ham radio equipment. It was my workspace, my hobby room, my escape pod from the world. To Carol, it was an unsanctioned auxiliary dwelling. "That," I said, gesturing grandly towards the freshly poured concrete slab and the neat stacks of lumber, "is a shed, for storing shed-like things. Rakes, a lawnmower I'll never use, the hopes and dreams you crush on a daily basis." Her eyes scanned the scene, her brain already cross-referencing the construction with her sacred text. "I see no permit posted." I grinned, a feral, triumphant thing. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I strode over to the small sign hammered into the lawn, flipped up its protective plastic cover, and pointed. "City of Maple Creek Building Permit #734B. Approved last Tuesday. All inspections passed. All fees paid. It's as legal as your beige pantsuit, Carol. Probably more so. I think that shade was discontinued in 2003. For a moment, she was speechless. It was a glorious, fleeting instant of pure victory. Her clipboard trembled slightly. But then her eyes fell upon the two men walking around the side of the house, my contractors. Gus, the head contractor, was a burly man in his 50s, with a sun-beaten face and a look of permanent, weary amusement. He'd seen 1,000 Carols in his 30 years of building things. He spotted her, and his shoulders slumped a half-inch. "Morning, ma'am," Gus said, his voice a low rumble. He held up a hand before she could speak. "Permits are posted. We're within the legal hours for construction noise, and my truck is not parked on the grass." Carol ignored him, her attention fixed on the concrete slab. She walked over to it, her sensible pumps leaving faint impressions in the damp earth around the edges. She crouched, her finger hovering over the surface. "The finish," she declared. "It's too industrial. It has that rough float finish. The covenant specifies a soft, brushed texture for all visible concrete surfaces." Gus looked at me, his eyebrows raised so high they threatened to merge with his hairline. He lowered his voice to a stage whisper only I could hear. "You want me to brush the wet concrete? Does she want me to bedazzle it too? Just say the word, Leo. I've got some glitter in the truck from my kid's school project. We could make it a nice HOA-approved fuchsia." "Just smile and nod, Gus," I murmured, stepping between him and the source of our collective misery. "Smile and nod. We'll deal with the concrete texture later." "It will be noted in my report," Carol said, standing up and brushing invisible dust from her pants. She gave the whole scene one last disapproving glare, then turned and marched back toward her own perfectly manicured lawn, her clipboard held like a scepter. Gus watched her go, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Man, she's a piece of work. I built a 3-story house for a rock star once, and he was less picky than she is, and he wanted a shark tank in his living room. She runs on spite and the fumes of her own self-importance, Gus," I said, picking up my ladder. "But this shed is getting built." I don't care if I have to get every single shingle blessed by the Pope and notarized. This is my hill, and I'm prepared to die on it." Gus chuckled, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "All right, Leo. Let's get back to building your spite shed. The sooner we get the walls up, the sooner you have something to hide behind." I looked at the organized chaos of my future nerd cave, then back toward Carol's house. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. This was about freedom, and I had a feeling the Battle of Maple Creek Estates had only just begun. The following weeks became a blur of sawdust, sweat, and ceaseless psychological warfare. Building the shed was the easy part. Gus and his crew were professionals. They worked fast and clean. The framing went up in a single day, a skeleton of fresh pine that smelled like progress. The roof followed, then the siding. Every step of the way, Carol was there. She didn't confront the workers directly anymore. Gus had made it clear, in his polite but firm way, that his job was to build according to the city-approved plans, not the whims of the HOA Style Committee. So Carol adapted. She became a silent observer, a specter in beige, standing on her property line, clipboard in hand, taking notes. The emails started arriving every evening. Subject: HOA compliance notice, noise ordinance. Leo, please be advised that construction noise, while technically within the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. window, was measured today at a peak of 85 decibels. This is considered excessive and disruptive to the tranquil character of our community. Please instruct your workers to hammer more softly. I replied with a screenshot of the city ordinance, which clearly stated that construction noise was exempt from the standard decibel limits during approved hours. I highlighted the relevant passage in bright yellow. The next day's email was about the paint. Subject: urgent, unapproved exterior color palette. Leo, the siding on your structure appears to be a shade of gray. As you know from the Welcome Packet, Section 7, all exterior paint colors must be chosen from the approved community palette. These include Morning Mist, a light grayish, Dovetail, a medium taupe, and Quiet Fawn, a slightly darker grayish. Your cyber gray, as your contractor called it, is a stark and frankly hostile color. You have 48 hours to repaint. This was the one I was ready for. I didn't just reply. I attached a 12-page PDF document. It was a formal application for a technological infrastructure variance. I'd drafted it myself, complete with technical specifications for the server equipment I'd be installing. I argued that cyber gray wasn't an aesthetic choice, but a functional one. The paint, I claimed, contained ceramic microspheres that gave it superior thermal emissive properties, crucial for reflecting solar radiation and reducing the cooling load on the shed's HVAC system, thereby ensuring the stable operation of I just wrote critical network hardware. I even included thermal imaging diagrams I'd found online to illustrate my point. The HOA board, which consisted of Carol and 2 terrified-looking retirees who voted with her on everything, was stumped. My request was so full of jargon and official-looking charts that they had no choice but to approve it. I received a begrudging 1-sentence approval email 2 days later. That victory was sweeter than any paycheck I'd ever earned. But my triumph pushed Carol over the edge. Her surveillance escalated to open harassment. One afternoon, Gus was using a circular saw to cut a piece of siding when a police car rolled silently up to the curb. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a thick mustache and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen it all. The other was younger, barely out of his 20s, and looked like he was trying very hard not to be amused. I walked over from the porch, my heart doing a little tap dance of anxiety. "Afternoon, officers," I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Everything all right?" "We got a call," the older one, Officer Miller, said, his eyes drifting towards the shed. "Report of a suspicious industrial operation in a residential zone." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. A suspicious industrial operation? You mean the shed? I pointed. Gus had turned off the saw and was now leaning against the frame, nonchalantly eating a bag of chips. Yep, that's my gnome factory. Churning out unlicensed garden gnomes 24/7. Business is booming. The younger cop, Officer Davis, cracked a smile before quickly suppressing it. The complainant mentioned heavy machinery and a possible violation of zoning laws. Heavy machinery? I scoffed. You mean Gus's pickup truck? Or his saw, which you can buy at any Home Depot? I was prepared for this. I jogged inside and came back with a crisp plastic folder. It was my Carol folder. Here you go, I said, handing it to Officer Miller. Permit hash 734B, approved by the city. The noise ordinance schedule, with the construction exemption clearly marked. The HOA paint variance approval form, signed by the board. And a copy of the shed's blueprints, also city approved. Anything else you need? My birth certificate? A sworn affidavit that I am not, in fact, building a secret lair from which to take over the world. Officer Miller flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable. He spent a good 30 seconds looking at the paint variance form. He handed the folder back. Looks like you're good, sir. He glanced across the street. Carol was standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching the whole scene unfold. Ma'am, Officer Davis called out, his voice carrying easily in the quiet afternoon. They're just building a shed. It's all permitted. Please only use 911 for actual emergencies. Carol's voice came back, tight with indignation. The erosion of our community standards is an emergency. The cops exchanged a look. It was a subtle, fleeting thing, but it spoke volumes. It was the universal look of people who have to deal with a Carol on a regular basis. Have a good day, sir, Officer Miller said to me, tipping his cap. They got back in their car and drove off, leaving me alone with the humming silence of a battle won. As the shed neared completion, I began the final, most important phase, installing the tech. I ran armored fiber optic cable in a trench from the house. I installed a commercial-grade Unify router, a multi-terabyte NAS for storage, and a rack of sleek black servers that hummed with quiet potential. The centerpiece, however, was my ham radio setup. A brand-new ICOM IC7300 connected to a discrete antenna on the shed's roof that looked, to the untrained eye, like a simple weather vane. This hobby was also what led me to volunteer with the County Emergency Management Agency, the EMA. I'd seen a flyer at a local electronics shop. They needed volunteers with technical and radio skills to help maintain and test their communications network. For me, it was a perfect fit. I got to play with high-end gear, keep my skills sharp, and get a modest tax write-off for my time. Once a month, I'd go down to the county building, a grim concrete bunker, and participate in drills. We'd test the emergency broadcast system, run diagnostics on the server that sent out weather alerts, and ensure the backup generators worked. It was mostly routine stuff, designed to make sure the system didn't crash if someone accidentally tried to send a 4K cat video over the emergency channel during a crisis. During one of these drills, I saw the main dashboard for the regional alert system. It was a stark, utilitarian interface, but one button always drew my eye. It was large, virtual, and colored a shade of red that screamed, "Do not touch." It was labeled Regional Push Alert. That's the big one, the EMA director had told us during training. You push that, and it overrides every TV and radio station in a 50-mile radius. It sends a non-skippable alert to every cell phone connected to a tower in the designated area. You only press that if the sky is literally falling. Misusing it is a federal offense. Big-time felony. So, don't. I remember laughing about it at the time. The idea of me, a guy who just wanted to be left alone in his shed, Ever having a reason to push that button was absurd. The day Gus and his crew packed up for the last time, I stood in my backyard and admired their work. The nerd cave was complete. The cyber-gray paint looked sleek and modern. The door opened with a satisfying, airtight whoosh. Inside, the lights were a cool, clean white, and the servers hummed a gentle lullaby of pure data. It was perfect. That evening, I sat in my new command center, monitoring the local weather channels. The meteorologists were getting more animated. A potent storm system that had been lingering to the west was now organizing, feeding on the hot, humid summer air. "Folks in the Tri-County area are going to want to keep an eye on the sky tomorrow afternoon," one of them said, pointing a dramatic finger at a swirling mass of red and yellow on the weather map. "We have all the ingredients in place for a significant severe weather event." I glanced out the shed's small, triple-paned window. The sky was a placid, peaceful blue, streaked with the gentle pinks of sunset. For now. I woke up the next day to an unnatural silence. Not the gentle, pre-dawn quiet of a normal Tuesday, but a thick, oppressive stillness. The air was already heavy, saturated with a humidity so dense you could almost chew it. I walked to the kitchen to make coffee and glanced out the window. The sky wasn't blue. It was a pale, sickly yellow-green, the color of a day-old bruise. The birds, usually a cacophonous orchestra at this hour, were silent. It was a tornado sky. Anyone who's lived in this part of the country for more than a year knows that color. It's a primal warning, a message from the atmosphere itself that something wicked this way comes. My phone buzzed on the counter. A push notification from my weather app. Tornado watch issued for your area until 8 p.m. A watch, not a warning. It just meant conditions were favorable. Be aware. Have a plan. I spent the morning in the Nerd Cave, my new sanctuary. The climate control kept the air cool and dry, a stark contrast to the suffocating soup outside. The hum of the servers was a comforting mantra. I was running diagnostics on a client's network, losing myself in lines of code, feeling a million miles away from the ominous sky. I had finally achieved my suburban dream. Perfect peace, protected by a firewall and soundproof insulation. The dream was shattered around 11:30 a.m. by a sharp rap on the shed door. I sighed. There was only one person it could be. I swung the heavy door open. There stood Carol, clipboard in hand, dressed in a crisp white blouse and khaki capris. Her expression was one of grim determination. "Leo," she said, her voice devoid of any preamble. "The board has authorized me to perform a final binding HOA inspection on this structure." "Carol, the city already did that. They're, the actual legal authority on buildings." "The city concerns itself with safety," she retorted. "The HOA concerns itself with standards. They are not the same thing." She pushed past me into the shed, her eyes darting around, searching for violations. Her gaze landed on my server rack with its blinking green and blue lights. "What is all this?" "It's my computer," I said flatly. "I use it to browse the internet, look at cat pictures, occasionally prevent multinational corporations from having their data stolen by Russian hackers. The usual." She ignored the servers and pulled out a laser level, placing it on the floor. The red line shot across the room, perfectly parallel to the baseboards. She grunted, clearly disappointed. She moved to the walls, tapping them with her knuckles. "The roof shingles," she announced, pointing upward. "Your contractor used interlocking asphalt. The approved material according to the revised 2023 guidelines is architectural composite." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Carol, they're the same material." Architectural composite is the marketing name they use at Home Depot to charge 20% more for the exact same asphalt shingle. I have the brochure if you'd like to see it. It has a picture of a smiling, trustworthy-looking family on the cover." "I'm noting it down," she said, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "And this humming. What is this incessant humming? It's audible from the property line." "That's the sound of my career, Carol. Those are the cooling fans for the servers. They keep thousands of dollars of electronics from melting into a puddle of silicon. It's about 40 decibels, well below the 60 decibel limit for daytime residential noise, as stipulated in Section 9. I measured. I pointed to a small, professional-grade decibel meter sitting on a shelf. She was losing, and she knew it. Her face was tightening. She was about to launch into a new tirade about the unapproved brand of drywall screws I'd probably used when both of our phones let out a synchronized, jarring buzz. I looked at mine. It was the alert I'd been expecting. "Tornado watch for your area. Any normal human being, upon receiving official notification that the atmosphere might be preparing to spawn a swirling vortex of death, would conclude their argument about roofing materials and go inside." But Carol was not a normal human being. "Don't think a little bad weather is going to get you out of this, Leo," she said, her eyes narrowing. "This inspection will be completed, and a full report will be filed." My internal monologue was screaming. The sky is the color of alien vomit. The birds have gone silent. The National Weather Service is telling everyone to hide. And Carol's biggest concern is my shingle selection. This woman would critique the font on the Dead Sea Scrolls during the apocalypse. As if on cue, a new sound filled the air. It started as a low moan and rose to a full-throated, gut-wrenching wail. It was the community warning siren, mounted on a tall pole in the park a few blocks away. At noon, every Tuesday, it let out a short 1-minute test blast. The sound was jarring, loud, and designed to grab your attention. It did its job. I saw Carol flinch, her hand going to her ear. A look of profound irritation crossed her face. "That dreadful noise," she muttered once it stopped. "It's a public nuisance. Frightens the children, upsets the dogs. I've lodged 3 formal complaints with the city about it. It's archaic. We have phones for alerts now." "It's a tornado siren, Carol," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "In the middle of Tornado Alley. It's supposed to be dreadful. That's kind of the point. It's hard to ignore." "It's an eyesore and a menace," she snapped, giving my server rack one last dirty look before turning on her heel. "This inspection isn't over, Leo." She stormed out of the shed, leaving me in the cool, humming silence. I looked at the green sky outside my window, then at my bank of monitors, one of which was now displaying a live radar map. A large, angry-looking supercell was blossoming about 40 miles to the west, and it was heading our way. The piece I had built for myself in my nerd cave felt fragile, like a soap bubble in a hurricane, and I had a sinking feeling that the siren test wasn't the last time we'd be hearing that dreadful, wonderful noise today. An hour later, the world outside had gone from ominous to apocalyptic. The sickly yellow-green sky had deepened to a bruised, turbulent purple-black. The wind had picked up. Not a steady breeze, but strange, violent gusts that rattled the shed and sent leaves skittering across the lawn in frantic circles. I wasn't in my house. I was in the nerd cave, my command center. This was the most secure room on my property, built to withstand more than just Carol's withering glares. On one of my monitors, I had the local news broadcast. On another, I had advanced radar software running, the same kind the storm chasers use. And on that screen, I saw it. The supercell was no longer a diffuse blob of color. It had organized, tightened, and on its southern flank, a small, terrifying shape had formed, a perfect hook echo, the classic signature of a developing tornado. My stomach clenched. This was no longer a possibility. It was happening. As if summoned by the image on the screen, my entire technological ecosystem screamed at me in unison. My EMA-issued pager, a relic from the 90s that I was required to carry, let out a series of frantic, high-pitched beeps. My phone, sitting on the desk, lit up and began to vibrate violently, emitting the shrill, unmistakable tone of a government alert. The message on the screen was blunt. "Tornado warning issued for your area. Take shelter now." A split second later, the outside world joined the chorus. The community warning siren spooled up, not for a 1-minute test this time, but for real. Its wail was a rising, terrifying scream that saturated the air, a primal cry that bypassed the ears and drilled straight into the lizard part of the brain that knows fear. This was it, the real deal. I kicked into autopilot, my emergency plan clicking into place. Grab the go bag I kept in the shed. Head for the small, windowless bathroom in the center of the main house, the designated shelter point. But then, something impossible happened. The siren, which should have been wailing continuously until the danger passed, sputtered and died. It didn't fade out. It was a clean cut, like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden, profound silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise had been. I froze, halfway out of my chair. What happened? Did it lose power? But the lights in my shed were on, and I could hear my neighbor's air conditioner still running. Did it malfunction? And that's when the countdown began. 4 minutes that felt like 4 years. Minute 1. The discovery. I scrambled from the shed to the back door of my house, my brain refusing to process what my ears were telling me. From the kitchen window, I had a clear view of the small community park where the siren pole stood, and there, walking away from the gray metal control box at the base of the pole, was a figure. A figure in a white blouse and khaki capris. She paused to adjust her sun hat, which was threatening to fly off in the violent wind, then continued her brisk, purposeful walk back toward her house. It was Carol. She had a key. I remembered her mentioning it at an HOA meeting, that the president held a key for emergency maintenance. She hadn't performed maintenance. She had performed an execution. My blood ran cold. Disbelief warred with a rising, incandescent rage. I fumbled for my phone and pulled up the town's community Facebook page. The posts were already starting to pop up. Cheryl M. Did the siren stop for anyone else? Tom B. Yeah, I thought it was supposed to keep going. Maybe it was a false alarm? Brenda P. Oh, thank God. That noise gives my little Fifi such anxiety. I was just about to come out of the basement. My heart hammered against my ribs. Brenda, no! Get back in the basement! People were confused. They thought the danger was over. Carol hadn't just silenced a machine. She was actively endangering hundreds of people because she found the sound of their potential salvation disturbing. Minute 2. The failed appeal. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled to find her contact. I speed-dialed her number, straight to voicemail. A chipper, recorded voice announced, "You've reached Carol Peters. I'm currently busy upholding our community standards, but your call is important to me. Please leave a message." I hung up and sent a text, hammering the screen with my thumbs. "Carol, turn the siren back on. That is a real tornado warning. You are putting people in danger." I watched the screen. The message status changed from delivered to read. The 3 little dots of a reply appeared, and then vanished. She had read my message, and she was ignoring me. Panic began to bubble in my chest. I called Gus, my contractor, who lived just on the other side of the park. He picked up on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "Leo, what the hell is going on? The siren quit!" "Gus, get your family in the cellar, now!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "It's not a mistake. Carol shut it off. I saw her." "What? Are you serious?" he yelled over a sudden roar of wind. My wife was just saying we should come up. The kids are scared. No, stay put. I'm not kidding, Gus. Tell everyone you know, it's real. I hung up, my mind racing. I couldn't call everyone. I couldn't knock on every door. There wasn't time. Minute 3. The grim calculus. I looked out the window again. A young couple 2 houses down had come out onto their front porch. They were looking up at the bruised sky, confused expressions on their faces. The man pointed towards the west. The woman shrugged. They were exposed, vulnerable. The reality of the situation crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. This went beyond HOA squabbles and petty tyranny. This was life and death. Carol, in an act of supreme, world-ending arrogance, had made a decision for all of us. She had decided her personal comfort was more important than our collective survival. I looked at my radar screen. The Hook Echo was a vicious crimson claw now, just a few miles away. The National Weather Service was issuing frantic, all-caps updates. Confirmed large and dangerous tornado on the ground. This is a life-threatening situation. And my neighborhood was silent. A cold, clear rage burned through the panic. It was a clarifying fire. There was no one to call, no authority that could act in time. There was only me. Minute 4. The unthinkable option. I sprinted from my house, the wind tearing at my clothes, and flung open the door to the nerd cave. It felt like diving into a submarine as the depth charges went off. I slammed the heavy door shut, sealing myself in the cool, quiet hum of the servers. I threw myself into my chair, my hands flying across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. I didn't navigate to a website. I opened a secure VPN tunnel, the one that connected me to the county EMA network. My volunteer portal. My access was limited. I was a peon, a digital grease monkey. But I had a login, and I knew the system architecture. The dashboard loaded. It was the same stark utilitarian interface from my training drills. In the top right corner, it glowed. The big red button. Regional push alert. My cursor hovered over it. The director's voice echoed in my head. Federal offense. Big-time felony. A small tooltip popped up as my cursor rested on the button, as if to remind me of the gravity of my choice. For authorized personnel use only. Unlawful activation is a federal offense punishable by up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. My eyes flicked from the legal warning on the screen to the live radar feed. The tornado was now entering the outskirts of town. My internal monologue was no longer sarcastic. It was a cold, brutal equation. On one hand, a potential felony charge, financial ruin, and a decade in a concrete room. On the other hand, the faces of that young couple on their porch. Gus and his kids in their cellar. Hundreds of people lulled into a false sense of security because one woman decided a tornado warning was harshing her vibe. The choice took about 3 seconds. 2 of which were spent wondering if I could bill the county for my future legal fees. My finger clicked the mouse. The click of the mouse was anticlimactic. A tiny, insignificant sound in the humming sanctuary of my nerd cave. For a single, heart-stopping half-second, nothing happened. A half-second in which I had time to think, oh God, what have I done? What if it doesn't even work? What if I broke it? Then the world erupted. It wasn't a single sound. It was a symphony of glorious, government-mandated chaos. My own phone, sitting on the desk, shrieked to life. My laptop, connected to a speaker system, let out the deafening staccato burt, burt, burt of the emergency alert system. The television mounted on the wall, which had been on the local news, flashed a stark black and red screen with the same alert. And from outside, I could hear it. A faint, tinny echo at first, then a growing wave of sound. It was the sound of the alert blaring from every house in the neighborhood, from cars driving down the street, from the phone in Carol's pocket. It was 1,000 times more invasive, more personal, and more inescapable than the single community siren ever could have been. It was the sound of a digital god screaming in every ear simultaneously. I scrambled to the shed's small window. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Lights flicked on in houses that had been dark. The young couple who had been standing on their porch vanished back inside their home so fast they were practically a blur. I saw the curtains twitch in every window up and down the street. My gaze fell on Carol's house. She was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, phone in hand. She wasn't looking at the sky. She was looking at her phone with an expression of profound and utter betrayal, as if it had just grown teeth and insulted her mother. She stabbed at the screen, trying to silence it, but the EAS alert cannot be silenced. It is relentless. Just then, the sky went from dark to pitch black. The wind stopped being a gust and became a solid wall of force. The lights in my shed flickered, dimmed, but held. The entire structure groaned around me, a deep, wooden protest against the impossible pressure. And then came the sound you hear about in stories. A deafening, soul-shaking roar, like 1,000 freight trains passing inches from your head. It was a sound of pure, elemental fury. It lasted for maybe 20 seconds, an eternity in which the world seemed to be tearing itself apart. Then, as quickly as it came, the roaring faded, moving off to the east. The wind eased. The lights returned to their full, steady brightness. The immediate danger was over. My legs felt like jelly. I sank back into my chair, my whole body trembling with adrenaline. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a normal text message. It was from Gus. Holy crap. That was close. Heard it go right over us. Thanks, man, seriously. I managed a shaky breath. I looked out the window again. The neighborhood was still standing. My house was fine. Carol's house was fine. But in the park, the grand 100-year-old oak tree that had stood beside the community siren was gone. It was splintered, a jagged stump where a proud giant had been. Its massive trunk lay across the park, its upper branches having crushed a section of fence right next to the silent, useless siren pole. Poetic justice. Thy name is F5. 10 minutes later, as the rain began to fall in thick, heavy sheets, I saw the flashing lights. Not red and blue, but just blue. 2 sheriff's department cruisers pulled up to the curb, not with the lazy boredom of the city cops, but with a crisp, intimidating urgency. And they weren't pulling up to Carol's house. They were pulling up to mine. I knew what this was about. I took a deep breath, opened the heavy door of my shed, and walked out to meet them. 2 deputies got out. They were all business, their faces grim under the brims of their hats. They moved with a purpose that made Officers Miller and Davis look like mall cops. "Sir, are you Leo Kowalski?" the taller one asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. "That's me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Let me guess. This isn't about my lawn gnome factory." My attempt at humor was met with a stony silence. "We've traced an unauthorized activation of the Federal Emergency Alert System to an IP address at this residence," he said, his voice flat and official. "Sir, that's a serious federal crime. We need you to put your hands behind your back." My stomach dropped to my feet. This was it. The felony part of the equation. As the deputy reached for his handcuffs, a new figure entered the scene. Carol came storming across her lawn, her face a mask of purple rage, her hair plastered to her head by the rain. "Arrest him, officers!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's a menace, a terrorist. He hacked the system and caused a citywide panic. I was handling the situation. The community siren was clearly malfunctioning, so I turned it off to prevent confusion." The deputy paused, his eyes flicking from me to Carol and back again. The accusation, combined with my silence, seemed to cement his decision, He pulled out the handcuffs, but his partner, who had been speaking quietly into the radio on his shoulder, held up a hand. "Hold on, Mark." He looked at Carol, then at me. "Dispatch, can you confirm the status of the Maple Creek community siren at the time of the tornado warning?" The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. The voice was tinny but clear. "Affirmative, Unit 7. Be advised. County EMA confirms the community siren was manually deactivated at 13:42 hours. The access key for the control panel is registered to the HOA president, a Miss Carol Peters." Silence. The rain pattered on the roofs. A distant ambulance wailed. The deputy holding the handcuffs, Mark, slowly lowered them. He looked at the radio. He looked at my calm, resigned face. He looked at Carol's sputtering, indignant one, where the color was rapidly draining away. His entire demeanor shifted. The cold professionalism aimed at me now refocused, like a high-powered lens directly onto Carol. The predator, surrounded by law enforcement and still convinced she was the one in charge, had just become the prey. The air grew thick with a new kind of tension. The immediate threat of the storm was gone, replaced by the slow, grinding inevitability of the law. Deputy Mark holstered his handcuffs with a decisive click and took a deliberate step towards Carol. His partner stood beside him, a silent, imposing wall of authority. "Ma'am," Deputy Mark said, his voice dangerously soft. "Let me see if I understand this correctly. The National Weather Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the County Emergency Management Agency all issued a life-threatening tornado warning for this area." He paused, letting the weight of those organizations hang in the air. "And you, with no meteorological training, decided that all of them were wrong. But you were right?" Carol's righteous fury began to crumble, replaced by a flustered panic. It was a malfunction. The siren was making a terrible noise. It was going on and on. It was causing a panic. I have a responsibility to maintain order in this community." "Your responsibility is to maintain order, ma'am, not to overrule a federal life-saving warning system," the deputy countered, his voice never rising but cutting through her excuses like a scalpel. "You say you were preventing a panic. From what I hear, the only panic started when the siren went silent, when people thought the danger was over and started coming out of their shelters, right before a confirmed tornado passed less than half a mile from this street." He gestured with his chin towards the splintered remains of the giant oak tree in the park. "You're lucky that tree is the only casualty. You're lucky this street isn't a pile of rubble right now." I was acting in the community's best interest," she stammered, her gaze darting around as if looking for an escape route. "Whose best interest, ma'am?" The second deputy finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "The best interest of the family with 2 kids who live at the end of the block? Or the elderly couple across the street? Or were you acting in your own best interest because you found the noise inconvenient?" Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. Her entire world, built on a foundation of bylaws and absolute certainty, had just been demolished more thoroughly than if the tornado had scored a direct hit. "Miss Peters," Deputy Mark said, his voice now firm and official, "we need you to come with us. We have some more questions for you down at the station." He gently but firmly took her by the arm. The look on her face was a masterpiece of disbelief and indignation. She was being detained. Her, Carol Peters. It was an impossibility. As they led her towards one of the cruisers, neighbors began to peek out from behind their curtains. The community Facebook page was already exploding, the digital equivalent of panicked chickens scattering in a coop. A new group had already been formed: Maple Creek Estates Emergency HOA Presidential Election. An hour later, after giving a lengthy statement to the deputies, another official-looking vehicle pulled up. This one was a black SUV with the county seal on the side. A woman in a severe black suit stepped out. She was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes, and an air of no-nonsense competence. She introduced herself as Director Evans, the head of the county EMA. She sent the deputies on their way and turned to me. I braced myself for the lecture of a lifetime. "Mr. Kowalski," she began, her tone as grim as the storm clouds that were now finally breaking up. "Let's be perfectly clear. What you did today was illegal, dangerous, and completely outside of every protocol we have. You initiated a Level 1 regional alert without authorization. You could have caused a multi-jurisdictional panic. You could have crashed the entire system with a feedback loop. Do you have any idea the kind of trouble you were in?" I met her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. I believe the pop-up mentioned a decade in prison and a fine that would require me to sell several of my vital organs on the black market." She didn't smile, but the corner of her eye twitched. "And yet you did it anyway." "The alternative seemed worse," I said quietly. She stared at me for a long, silent moment. The preliminary track from the NWS shows the tornado's debris field passed less than half a mile north of this subdivision. The 911 dispatch logs show a dramatic drop in calls for assistance and welfare checks from this area after your unauthorized alert went out, compared to the neighborhood a mile east of here, which was also in the direct path. You also saved lives, Mr. Kowalski." She let out a long sigh. "So, here's what's going to happen. My official report will state that during the tornado, a system-wide diagnostic was triggered due to an anomalous power surge, which resulted in the rebroadcast of the NWS warning. It will be a very boring, very technical report, and no one will ever question it." My jaw nearly hit the wet pavement. "Don't look so surprised," she said dryly. "The last thing I need is a media circus about how my state-of-the-art alert system was defeated by an HOA president with a noise complaint, only to be saved by a civilian vigilante. It's bad for next year's budget." She looked me dead in the eye. "But you and I will know the truth. And I want you to know this. Don't you ever, ever do that again." She extended a hand. I shook it. Her grip was like iron. "Thank you," she said, her voice dropping the official tone. "We're updating your volunteer access level to 0, and we'll probably send you a bill for the server stress test." She gave me a ghost of a smile, then turned and got back in her SUV, leaving me standing on the damp sidewalk, a free man. The story ends a week later. The sky is a brilliant, peaceful blue. I'm sitting on my front porch in a new Adirondack chair, a cold beer sweating in my hand. Gus is in the chair next to me, holding a beer of his own. The city crew has already cleared the remains of the fallen oak, leaving a conspicuous patch of empty green in the park. The HOA is in glorious, beautiful chaos. An emergency election is scheduled for next month. 3 different people have already announced their candidacy, each promising more transparency and fewer rules about mailbox fonts. Carol, I'd heard, was out on bail and facing a laundry list of charges, starting with reckless endangerment. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gus. It contained a screenshot of a GoFundMe page titled Carol Peters Legal Defense Fund. The goal was $50,000. The current amount raised was $25. The sole donation was from a C. Peters. "Think she'll make her goal?" Gus asked, taking a long drink of his beer. "I don't know, Gus," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But I do know one thing." "What's that?" "My new security camera. The one that's a half-inch too big. It caught the whole thing. The deputies, Director Evans, even the look on Carol's face when she heard the radio dispatch. Crystal clear 4K. I took a sip of my beer. It had never tasted so good. "And tomorrow, I'm painting my mailbox. I'm thinking a nice, bright, unapologetic emergency red." I looked out over my quiet little kingdom. The war was over. The beige tyranny had fallen. Let him try and find me now, I said.